The people who whisper, "You don't belong here," are usually terrified someone better than them already does. Rain crawled down the glass walls of the Whitmore Grand Hotel like silver veins across black marble as Manhattan's elite drifted through the ballroom beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most American homes. Champagne glasses clinked softly. Diamond bracelets caught the light. Expensive laughter floated through the room in polished little bursts that sounded rehearsed rather than real. Evelyn Carter moved quietly between tables carrying a silver tray balanced perfectly in one hand, her black uniform pressed neatly despite the 12-hour shift already weighing on her shoulders. At 29, she had mastered the art of becoming invisible. Invisible people survived longer in rooms like these. Table 12 needs another bottle of Dom Perignon, one manager whispered sharply as he passed her near the ballroom entrance. And smile more. These people donate millions. Evelyn nodded softly. Of course. Her voice remained calm even as her feet ached inside worn black heels she'd owned for almost 3 years. Across the ballroom, cameras flashed near the grand staircase as Damian Whitmore entered beside his wife. The CEO of Whitmore Holdings looked exactly like the financial magazines always described him. Tall, controlled, untouchable. His dark suit fit perfectly against broad shoulders, and the silver streak near his temple somehow made him look even more intimidating. People straightened when he walked past. Conversations shifted around him like water moving around stone. But it wasn't Damian people feared tonight. It was Victoria Whitmore. She walked beside her husband in a white designer gown that shimmered beneath the chandeliers like fresh snow under moonlight. Elegant, sharp, dangerous. The kind of woman who could humiliate someone with a single glance and still look graceful doing it. That's the governor near the east balcony. Another waitress whispered nervously to Evelyn. And the senator from New York just arrived. Evelyn nodded again, adjusting the tray carefully against her palm. She hated galas like this. Too many people pretending kindness while measuring each other's value by watches and last names. She turned near the center aisle just as one of the photographers stepped backward without looking. His shoulders slammed lightly into her arm. The tray tilted. A few drops of pale champagne splashed across Victoria Whitmore's white gown. Silence. It spread through the ballroom instantly. Fast, sharp, brutal. Evelyn froze. Her breathing caught for half a second as every nearby guest turned toward her. Victoria slowly looked down at the tiny stain near her waist, then lifted cold blue eyes toward Evelyn's face. The photographer immediately backed away. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," Evelyn said quietly. "It was an accident." Victoria stared at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not warmly. The kind of smile people used before destroying someone politely. "You don't belong here," she said softly enough that people leaned closer to hear it. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. A few guests looked away awkwardly. Others watched with open curiosity. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the silver tray, but her voice never shook. "I apologize for the dress." Victoria stepped closer. "That's not the point." Slowly, deliberately, she reached forward and pulled the staff name tag from Evelyn's uniform. The tiny metal clip snapped loose. Then Victoria let it fall onto the marble floor between them. Click. The sound echoed far louder than it should have. "People like you," Victoria continued calmly, "should learn to stay in the background." Somewhere near the staircase, thunder rolled beyond the glass windows overlooking Manhattan. Evelyn stared down at the name tag lying near Victoria's heels. For one brief moment, the entire ballroom held its breath. And across the room, Damian Whitmore finally looked up. Damian Whitmore did not move immediately. That was the first thing Evelyn noticed. Most powerful men rushed to protect appearances the second tension entered a room. But Damian simply stood near the staircase with one hand resting loosely in his pocket, his steel gray eyes fixed on the small silver name tag lying against the marble floor between his wife's heels and Evelyn's trembling fingers. The ballroom remained painfully quiet. Even the string quartet near the balcony had stopped playing. Somewhere in the distance, rain hammered softly against the towering windows overlooking Park Avenue. Evelyn slowly bent down to pick up the name tag. Her knees nearly touched the cold marble as dozens of wealthy strangers watched her in silence. Cameras still flashed occasionally from the far side of the ballroom, but now the flashes felt intrusive. Hungry. like people were waiting for humiliation to become entertainment. She picked up the tag carefully and stood again. Her expression stayed calm, though her chest tightened beneath the black uniform. "I said I was sorry," Evelyn repeated softly. Victoria crossed her arms. "And I heard you." Her gaze traveled slowly across Evelyn's uniform with visible disgust. "Do you know how much this gown costs?" Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. "No, ma'am. More than you probably make in a year." The words landed hard enough that several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. A man near the champagne tower quietly cleared his throat. Another woman looked down into her drink rather than watch. But nobody stepped in. Nobody ever stepped in when humiliation wore diamonds. Evelyn swallowed carefully. She had learned years ago that dignity was not about winning arguments. Sometimes dignity was surviving them without becoming cruel yourself. "Victoria." Damien's voice finally cut through the room. Low, controlled. Instantly, every head turned toward him. Victoria looked back at her husband, surprised by the warning hidden beneath that single word. Damien descended the staircase slowly, polished shoes tapping softly against marble. He looked composed as always, but something in his expression had changed. His attention remained entirely on Evelyn now. Not on the stain, not on the guests. On her. "It was an accident," Damien said calmly. Victoria gave a short laugh. "Of course you would say that. You were not the one wearing the dress." Damien stopped a few feet away from them. "No," he replied quietly. "I am the one hosting the room." The tension shifted immediately. Subtle. Dangerous. Victoria noticed it too. Her jaw tightened slightly as whispers spread across nearby tables. Evelyn remained still, holding the tiny silver name tag against her palm so tightly the edges pressed into her skin. She wanted to disappear. More than anything. Not because of Victoria's cruelty. She could survive cruelty. It was the attention she hated. The weight of hundreds of eyes studying her like she was no longer human but a moment. A scandal. A story people would repeat tomorrow over expensive coffee. One of the younger waiters near the service entrance glanced at Evelyn sympathetically before quickly looking away when Victoria noticed him. "You may go," Victoria told Evelyn coldly. "I do not want her serving this event anymore." The room fell silent again. Evelyn nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She turned carefully before anyone could see the emotion threatening behind her eyes. But as she began walking toward the service hallway, Damien suddenly spoke again. "What is your name?" Evelyn stopped. Slowly, she looked back over her shoulder. "Evelyn Carter, sir." Something flickered across Damien's face. Small, almost invisible. Recognition. The kind that arrives before memory fully catches up. Evelyn noticed it immediately, and for the first time that night, fear touched her chest. Damien studied her for several long seconds. The ballroom disappeared around him. The guests, the music, the cameras, gone. All he saw was a pair of quiet blue eyes he had not seen in years. Rain. Flashing ambulance lights. Blood on broken glass. A trembling young woman kneeling beside an older man on a dark highway outside Boston whispering, "Stay awake, sir. Please stay awake." Damien blinked once, pulling himself back into the ballroom. Evelyn's breathing grew shallow. She recognized that look now. Recognition was dangerous. Recognition ruined the carefully built distance people like her needed to survive. "Damien." Victoria's voice sharpened slightly. "What is it?" He did not answer immediately. His eyes never left Evelyn's face. Then, very quietly, he asked, "Have we met before?" A faint pulse of thunder rolled beyond the Manhattan skyline. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the silver name tag. "No, sir," she answered softly. But for the first time all night, her voice almost broke. The lie sat between them like fragile glass. Damien Whitmore knew it. Evelyn Carter knew it. And somehow that made the ballroom feel colder despite the golden chandelier light pouring across the marble floor. Victoria glanced between them with growing irritation. "You are staring at a waitress like she just walked out of a ghost story," she said sharply. "What exactly is going on?" Damien blinked slowly, pulling himself fully back into the present. Around them, conversation cautiously began returning in scattered whispers, though many guests were still watching openly. Wealthy people love discomfort as long as it belonged to someone else. Damien straightened his cuff calmly. "Nothing is going on." Victoria crossed her arms tighter. "Then why are you questioning staff in the middle of our gala?" Evelyn lowered her gaze immediately. "I should get back to work." She turned again before Damien could answer, moving quickly toward the service hallway with measured steps that somehow still carried dignity despite everything that had happened. Damien watched her disappear beyond the ballroom doors. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. 5 years. 5 years since that rain-soaked highway outside Boston. 5 years since his father's car had spun across black ice and slammed into a guardrail during a winter storm. The police reports had called it a miracle survival. The doctors had praised emergency response times. Newspapers had written elegant articles about resilience and recovery. But none of them mentioned the young woman who had stayed kneeling in freezing rain beside a bleeding stranger for nearly 3 hours while traffic crawled past without stopping. Damien remembered arriving at the hospital just before dawn. His father barely conscious, his expensive suit soaked from rainwater, and one exhausted young woman sitting quietly in a plastic waiting room chair, holding a paper cup of untouched coffee with both trembling hands. She had disappeared before anyone even learned her name. Until now. Damien. Victoria's voice snapped him back again. You are embarrassing. Me. He looked at her calmly. I think enough embarrassment has already happened tonight. Her face hardened instantly. Nearby guests pretended not to hear while listening to every word. You are taking her side? Victoria asked quietly. Dangerous quiet. Damien exhaled slowly. I am saying the situation did not require public humiliation. Victoria laughed once under her breath. Public humiliation? She stepped closer. She ruined a custom gown in front of donors, investors, and half of Manhattan. It was champagne, Damien replied. Not murder. The sharpness of his answer stunned even himself. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. Across the ballroom, several guests suddenly became deeply interested in their wine glasses. The Whitmores never argued publicly. That was one of the unspoken rules of high society. Wealthy marriages survived by hiding fractures behind polished smiles. Excuse me. A calm older voice interrupted the tension. Both turned toward Senator Richard Bennett approaching slowly from the east balcony. At 72, the senator carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to entering rooms without introducing himself. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and his navy tuxedo fit him with old-fashioned elegance. Damien, he said warmly, shaking his hand. Beautiful event. Senator Bennett, Damien replied politely. Thank you for coming. But the senator's attention drifted elsewhere almost immediately, toward the hallway Evelyn had disappeared into. His brow furrowed slightly. The young waitress, he said thoughtfully. What was her name? Victoria answered before Damien could. Staff. The senator barely acknowledged her response. No, he murmured softly. I know that face. Damien felt something tighten in his chest again. You have met her before? The senator remained silent for a moment. Rain tapped softly against the towering windows behind them. Then he shook his head slowly. Perhaps I am mistaken, but his expression suggested otherwise. Across the ballroom, a violinist cautiously resumed playing. The music floated gently through the tension like someone trying to cover broken glass with silk. Meanwhile, behind the service hallway doors, Evelyn stood alone beside industrial coffee machines humming softly against tiled walls. Her breathing finally broke. She gripped the edge of a stainless steel counter as emotion rushed through her chest all at once. Humiliation, fear, exhaustion. She closed her eyes tightly. Pull yourself together, she whispered to herself. One of the younger waitresses approached carefully. Evelyn, are you okay? Evelyn nodded immediately, even though her eyes had turned glassy. I am fine. Mrs. Whitmore was out of line. Do not. Evelyn interrupted gently. Please. The younger waitress hesitated. Why did Mr. Whitmore look at you like that? Evelyn looked down at the silver name tag, still resting in her hand. Tiny scratches crossed the metal surface now. Because some people remember things too late, she said quietly. And out in the ballroom, Damien Whitmore could not stop thinking about the woman who had once disappeared before he could even thank her. The storm outside Manhattan grew heavier as the night stretched deeper into glittering exhaustion. Rain streaked across the hotel windows while thunder rolled somewhere above the skyline like distant warning drums. Inside the Whitmore Grand, the gala slowly recovered its rhythm. Waiters carried silver trays again. Wealthy donors resumed conversations about investments, politics, and luxury real estate, as though humiliation could simply dissolve beneath enough violin music and expensive wine. But the atmosphere had changed. People still glanced toward Damien Whitmore when they thought he was not looking. And Damien noticed every single one of them. He stood near the ballroom balcony now, one hand resting against the crystal railing while the city lights flickered below him in blurred gold reflections. Senator Bennett joined him quietly with a glass of bourbon in hand. "You recognized her too," the older man said softly. Damien did not answer immediately. "I am not certain." The senator gave a faint smile. "That means yes." Damien exhaled slowly through his nose. 5 years ago, my father nearly died outside Boston during a snowstorm." Bennett nodded once. "I remember. There was a young woman there before. Emergency services arrived. She stayed with him the entire time." Damien looked down toward the city streets far below. "I never learned her name. Until tonight." Damien finally turned toward him. "You know her?" The senator swirled the bourbon lightly in his glass. "Not personally, but I remember a charity medical conference in Chicago 3 years ago." His expression darkened thoughtfully. "There was a volunteer coordinator helping families after a hospital funding crisis. Quiet girl, blonde hair, blue eyes, worked 18-hour days and never asked for recognition." Damien felt his chest tighten again. "Evelyn." "I believe so." The senator looked back toward the ballroom entrance. "Interesting thing about invisible people, Damien. Sometimes they quietly hold entire worlds together while powerful people are busy looking at themselves." Before Damien could answer, movement near the center of the ballroom suddenly drew attention again. A distinguished older man, near table 14, staggered slightly while reaching for his chest. Several guests stepped back immediately in alarm. Glasses clinked against marble. A woman gasped softly. "Arthur," someone called nervously. Arthur Holloway, one of Whitmore Holdings' oldest investors, lowered himself awkwardly into a chair with visible difficulty breathing. Panic spread quickly through the nearby tables. Wealthy people handled financial crises better than human ones. Damien immediately started forward. So did several staff members. But before anyone else reached him, Evelyn appeared from the service hallway carrying a tray of sparkling water. The second she saw Arthur's pale face, her entire posture changed. Calm disappeared into focus. She set the tray down instantly and knelt beside him without hesitation. "Mr. Holloway," she said gently, "look at me." Arthur struggled to breathe evenly. Sweat glistened along his forehead beneath the ballroom lights. "I cannot." "You can," Evelyn replied softly. "Slow breaths. Do not fight it." Her voice carried strange steadiness, not rehearsed politeness. Experience. Damien stopped several feet away, watching her carefully. Evelyn loosened Arthur's collar slightly and guided him to sit back deeper into the chair. "Has this happened before?" Arthur nodded weakly. "Anxiety," he admitted between breaths. "Sometimes, okay." Evelyn remained perfectly composed. "You are safe. Focus on my voice." Around them, the ballroom had gone silent once more. Guests watched openly now, but this time the silence felt different. Less judgment, more uncertainty. Evelyn accepted a glass of water from another server without even looking away from Arthur. "Small sip," she instructed calmly. Arthur obeyed. Her movements were efficient, gentle, familiar. Damien noticed every detail. The way she checked his pulse discreetly. The way she lowered her voice whenever Arthur's breathing worsened. The way she blocked the crowd from overwhelming him. This was not ordinary hospitality training. "Should we call an ambulance?" someone asked nervously. Evelyn shook her head softly after another moment, checking his pulse. "Not yet. His pulse is stabilizing." Arthur looked at her with visible confusion. "How do you know that?" Evelyn hesitated. "Just briefly. My mother had panic attacks after chemotherapy treatments," she answered quietly. "I learned how to help." The honesty in her voice settled heavily across the ballroom. Several guests exchanged guilty glances, remembering how Victoria had spoken to her less than 30 minutes earlier. Arthur's breathing slowly steadied beneath Evelyn's calm guidance. Finally, after several long moments, color returned to his face. A weak smile touched his lips. "Well," he murmured softly. "That was embarrassing." A few nervous laughs rippled through the nearby tables. Tension eased slightly. Evelyn smiled faintly for the first time all evening. "No," she replied gently. "Human." Arthur looked at her for a long moment before carefully taking her hand. "Young lady," he said quietly, "you handled that better than half the private medical staff at my Palm Beach estate." Evelyn immediately tried to pull her hand back modestly, but Arthur held it a second longer. Thank you. Across the ballroom, Damian Whitmore watched the entire moment in complete silence. And for the first time in years, something inside him felt deeply unsettled. Not because Evelyn had impressed him, but because she reminded him of the kind of person he used to admire before wealth taught everyone around him to admire power instead. The ballroom slowly breathed again after Arthur Holloway recovered, but the energy had shifted in a way no amount of music or champagne could repair. Conversations became quieter, more careful. Guests who had laughed loudly an hour earlier now watched Evelyn Carter with thoughtful expressions as she returned silently to work, carrying fresh glasses across the marble floor like none of it had happened. But people noticed her now. That was the problem with dignity. Once someone revealed it under pressure, it became impossible to ignore afterward. Victoria Whitmore noticed the change immediately. She stood near the ballroom staircase holding a champagne flute she had barely touched, her posture flawless, her smile perfectly controlled for every donor who approached her. Yet beneath the polished surface, irritation simmered quietly. She had spent 15 years building a reputation around elegance and influence. Rooms obeyed her without needing instruction. People feared disappointing her. Tonight, for the first time in years, she felt the room leaning away from her instead of toward her. And she hated it. You should let the staff handle cleanup, one socialite murmured gently while watching Evelyn replace glasses near the investor tables. That young woman seems lovely. Victoria's smile tightened almost invisibly. Competent service is expected at this level. But the woman did not answer. Her attention remained on Evelyn helping an elderly guest adjust his chair with quiet patience. Across the ballroom, Damian noticed the exchange while loosening his cuff slightly. He could read Victoria better than anyone else in Manhattan. The colder her smile became, the more dangerous the night usually turned. Mr. Whitmore. Damian looked up as Arthur Holloway approached again, looking considerably steadier now. Feeling better? Damian asked. Arthur nodded. Much. His eyes drifted toward Evelyn near the service station. Thanks to her. Damian followed his gaze silently. Arthur lowered his voice. That girl carries herself like someone who has survived difficult things. Damian's expression darkened thoughtfully. I think she has. Arthur studied him carefully. You know her? Not really. That is not how you looked at her earlier. Damian exhaled softly. 5 years ago my father almost died in a car accident. Arthur listened quietly. A young woman stayed with him until help arrived. Tonight, I realized it was probably Evelyn. Arthur glanced toward her again. Probably. Damian gave a faint, humorless smile. People like her disappear quickly after doing something kind. They do not stay around waiting for gratitude. Arthur nodded slowly as if that answer disappointed him somehow. That says more about society than it does about her. Meanwhile, near the service hallway, Evelyn carefully polished a tray while trying to ignore the strange attention following her across the ballroom now. She hated this feeling. Being observed. Being discussed. One of the catering managers approached quietly beside her. Evelyn. Yes. Mrs. Whitmore wants you reassigned to kitchen duty for the remainder of the night. Evelyn paused only briefly. Understood. The manager hesitated awkwardly. Honestly, I think she is overreacting. Evelyn offered him a tired smile. People protect the image they built their lives around. Still, what happened out there was unfair. Evelyn looked down at the tray in her hands. Fairness is expensive in rooms like this. Before the manager could answer, a sudden burst of laughter rose near the piano stage where several investors had gathered around Senator Bennett. The senator raised his glass slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced warmly, before this evening ends, I would like to acknowledge someone. The ballroom gradually quieted again. Evelyn froze near the service entrance. Victoria's expression immediately sharpened. Senator Bennett continued calmly. Tonight, while many of us panicked, one young woman reminded this room what grace under pressure actually looks like. Heads turned instantly toward Evelyn. She looked horrified by the attention. Arthur Holloway smiled warmly in her direction. Hear, hear. A few guests softly applauded, then more joined. Not loud, not dramatic, but genuine. Evelyn's face flushed immediately. Please, she said quietly to nobody in particular. It was nothing. No. Arthur called gently across the room. It was kindness. Victoria's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. Damian noticed it immediately. The applause faded after a few seconds, but the emotional damage remained. Because admiration had entered the room now, and admiration was dangerous when directed towards someone society had already dismissed. Evelyn lowered her eyes, uncomfortable beneath the attention, and quietly slipped through the service doors toward the kitchen corridor. Damien watched her leave once again. This time he followed. Victoria turned sharply the second she noticed him moving. Damien. He stopped briefly near the ballroom exit. What? Do not do this here. Her voice remained calm for appearances, but the warning underneath was unmistakable. Damien looked at her for several long seconds. Then, very quietly, he asked, "Do what?" Victoria's expression hardened. "Make me look cruel for expecting standards." Damien glanced toward the hallway where Evelyn had disappeared. "No," he said softly. "Tonight did that on its own." And without waiting for a response, he walked out of the ballroom, leaving Victoria standing alone beneath the chandeliers, while whispers quietly began spreading through Manhattan's most powerful room. The noise of the ballroom faded the second Damien Whitmore stepped into the service corridor behind the gala. The air changed immediately. Gone were the chandeliers, violin music, and polished smiles. Back here, fluorescent lights hummed softly above industrial tile floors, while kitchen staff moved quickly between rolling carts and steaming trays. The smell of coffee, butter, and dish soap replaced expensive perfume. It was the part of the hotel wealthy people never noticed unless something stopped working. Damien walked slowly through the corridor, ignoring the startled looks from employees who immediately straightened when they recognized him. Most executives never entered spaces like this, not unless there was a problem. At the far and near the loading entrance, Evelyn stood alone beside a service counter folding white linen napkins with careful precision. Rain rattled softly against the metal door behind her. She sensed him before she looked up. "Mr. Whitmore." Her voice stayed respectful, calm, but distant now. Damien stopped several feet away, uncertain for the first time in a very long time. In boardrooms, uncertainty never touched him. Numbers made sense. Acquisitions made sense. Negotiations followed rules. But Evelyn Carter unsettled him because she reminded him there were still things money could not organize neatly. "You left before I could speak with you," he said quietly. Evelyn folded another napkin carefully before answering. "You looked busy." That was not why. She nodded faintly, but did not respond. Silence settled between them. Strange silence. Not hostile, just heavy with things both of them remembered differently. Damien studied her more carefully now beneath the harsh kitchen lighting. She looked tired. Not dramatic exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind carried quietly by people who worked 2 jobs and still apologized for sitting down too long. Her blonde hair had loosened slightly from its clip during the chaos earlier. Tiny shadows rested beneath her eyes. Yet somehow she still carried herself with more composure than half the guests in the ballroom. "It was you," Damien said finally. Evelyn's hands stopped moving. The highway outside Boston. He stepped closer slowly. 5 years ago. Evelyn lowered her gaze toward the folded napkins. "Mr. Whitmore, my father remembers almost nothing from that night," Damien continued softly. But he remembered one thing. Evelyn remained silent. He said there was a girl sitting beside him in freezing rain telling him stupid jokes to keep him awake until help arrived. A faint breath escaped Evelyn before she could stop it. Not quite laughter. More memory. Damien noticed immediately. "It was you." This time she did not deny it. Rain tapped harder against the metal door behind them. Somewhere deeper in the kitchen, dishes clattered softly. The ordinary sound somehow made the conversation feel even more intimate. "I did not stay for recognition," Evelyn said quietly. "I know." Damien paused. "Which is exactly why I never forgot it." Evelyn looked at him then, fully. Her blue eyes carried no bitterness, no attempt to impress him, and somehow that affected him more than anger would have. "Your father was scared," she said softly. "Anybody would have stopped." Damien gave a faint, humorless smile. "No. Most people drove past." The truth settled heavily between them. Evelyn looked away first. "I should get back to work." Damien glanced at the stack of folded linens beside her. "You should not even still be working tonight after what happened. People like me do not leave shifts early because rich people hurt our feelings." The sentence came out gently, not cruel, which somehow made it worse. Damien felt shame move quietly through his chest. "Evelyn, please do not apologize for your wife." She finally looked directly at him again. It will only embarrass both of us." He stared at her for a long moment. "You think that little of me?" "No," her voice softened slightly. "I think very highly of you, actually. That is why tonight was disappointing." The honesty landed harder than accusation. Damien looked down briefly, jaw tightening. For years, people had feared him, admired him, needed things from him. Very few spoke honestly anymore. Evelyn always did, even when she had every reason not to. "Why are you working here?" he asked quietly. "You are clearly capable of much more." Evelyn smiled faintly at that. Tired smile. "Life does not always move in straight lines." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Before Damien could respond, the kitchen doors suddenly burst open behind him. Victoria Whitmore stood there beneath the fluorescent lights, still elegant despite the tension burning behind her eyes. Her gaze moved from Damien to Evelyn and back again. And when she spoke, her voice was dangerously calm. "I knew I would find you here." The kitchen corridor seemed to shrink the second Victoria Whitmore stepped through the swinging doors. The fluorescent lights above cast sharp reflections across the marble jewelry resting against her throat, making her look almost carved from ice. Behind her, the distant music from the ballroom sounded faint now, muffled by steel doors and concrete walls. But the tension she carried entered the room clearly enough. Evelyn instinctively stepped back from the service counter. Not dramatically, just enough to create distance. Damien noticed immediately. Victoria noticed too. "So this is what tonight has become," Victoria said calmly, though anger flickered beneath every word. "My husband hiding in service hallways with hotel staff, while 200 guests wait upstairs." Damien's expression hardened slightly. "I came to speak with her." Obviously, Victoria's eyes moved toward Evelyn. "You certainly know how to attract attention." Evelyn lowered her gaze. "Mrs. Whitmore, I never intended—" "No," Victoria cut her off smoothly. "Women like you never intend anything. It simply happens around you, does it not?" Damien's jaw tightened. "Enough." Victoria looked at him in disbelief. "You are defending her again. I am asking you to stop humiliating someone who has done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong." Victoria laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Since the moment she spilled champagne on me, this entire evening has revolved around her." Evelyn spoke quietly before Damien could answer. "Mrs. Whitmore is right about one thing." Both turned toward her. Evelyn stood with her hands folded gently in front of her now, posture straight despite the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. "I should not be here anymore." Damien frowned immediately. "Evelyn." "No," she looked at him calmly. "This is your event. Your marriage. Your life." Her voice remained soft but steady. "I do not want to become another reason powerful people hurt each other." The honesty of the sentence silenced the corridor for a moment. Victoria studied her carefully now, not with superiority this time, with suspicion, as though she could not understand why someone standing in humiliation still sounded dignified instead of desperate. "You speak very carefully," Victoria said slowly. Evelyn gave a faint, tired smile. "Careful people survive longer." Somewhere deeper in the kitchen, a dishwasher clattered loudly before fading again into distant noise. Rain continued tapping softly against the metal loading door nearby. Manhattan storms always sounded lonelier from service hallways. Damien looked at Evelyn for several seconds before speaking again. "You saved my father's life." Victoria's eyes snapped toward him instantly. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "Barely a second, but enough." "Damien," Victoria said sharply. "What is she talking about?" He never looked away from Evelyn. 5 years ago, outside Boston. His voice lowered. She stayed with him after the accident until emergency services arrived. Silence. Heavy silence. Victoria stared at Evelyn now as though seeing her for the first time. "That was you." Evelyn looked uncomfortable beneath the attention again. "Anybody would have helped." "No," Damien answered quietly. "They did not." The words settled into the corridor with painful clarity. Victoria's composure slipped almost invisibly. Not guilt exactly. Something more unsettling. Uncertainty. Because wealthy people understood status instinctively. But genuine goodness confused them, especially when it arrived wearing a waitress uniform. "Why did you never say anything?" she asked Evelyn. Evelyn looked genuinely surprised by the question. "About helping someone after a car accident?" "About him." Victoria gestured sharply toward Damien. "About saving his father." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "Because kindness is not an investment." Damien looked down briefly at those words. They hit harder than anything else tonight. Victoria crossed her arms tightly, trying to recover control of the conversation. And now suddenly my husband remembers you after years. Victoria. Damien's warning tone returned immediately, but Evelyn shook her head gently. She deserves honesty. Both looked at her again. Evelyn exhaled softly before speaking. Your husband remembered because decent people remember who stayed beside them during difficult nights. Her eyes met Victoria's steadily now. That should not threaten anyone. The corridor went completely still. Even Damien looked stunned by the quiet courage in her voice. No anger. No manipulation. Just truth spoken softly enough that nobody could call it cruel. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, hurried footsteps approached from the ballroom entrance. One of the hotel event coordinators appeared breathless in the hallway. Mr. Whitmore, he said nervously. There is a problem upstairs. Damien immediately straightened. What happened? The governor just arrived unexpectedly. The press followed him in. The coordinator swallowed hard. And unfortunately, several reporters already heard about the incident with Mrs. Whitmore and the waitress. Victoria's face drained of color almost instantly. The coordinator hesitated awkwardly before continuing. They are asking questions. And for the first time all evening, the most powerful woman in the ballroom looked genuinely afraid. For a moment, nobody in the corridor moved. The event coordinator stood frozen beneath the fluorescent lights, clutching his tablet against his chest, while rain hammered harder against the loading door behind them. Somewhere upstairs, muffled music continued drifting faintly through the ceiling vents, but now it sounded distant. Fragile. Like the glamorous illusion of the gala was beginning to crack. Victoria Whitmore recovered first. She always did. Years inside Manhattan society had trained her to survive scandal before emotion. Her shoulders straightened instantly, and the fear that had flashed across her face disappeared behind polished control. How many reporters? She asked calmly. At least 6, the coordinator answered nervously. 2 entertainment outlets. 1 business network. The others are independent media. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Wonderful. Damien looked toward the ballroom staircase. Who spoke to them? The coordinator hesitated. Nobody directly, sir. But several guests recorded what happened earlier. Silence again. Heavy silence. Victoria's jaw tightened almost invisibly. In rooms like theirs, reputation traveled faster than truth. A 10-second video could destroy a decade of carefully built elegance overnight. Evelyn quietly stepped backward toward the service counter. I should leave. Damien immediately turned toward her. No, this situation is already bad enough. Her voice remained soft, but exhaustion now pulled at every word. If reporters see me, they already know there was a waitress involved. Victoria interrupted sharply. Leaving now through the lobby would make it worse. Evelyn lowered her gaze. Of course she was right. People like Evelyn never escaped public situations cleanly. They simply became stories others controlled afterward. Damien noticed the way her fingers tightened slightly around the silver name tag, still resting in her hand. She had never put it back on. I will handle the press, he said firmly. Victoria stared at him. Handle it how exactly? Damien looked at her calmly. By telling the truth. A faint, bitter laugh escaped Victoria before she could stop it. You think the truth matters once cameras appear? It should. That is not the world we live in, Damien. Her voice sharpened now. Those reporters are not interested in kindness or context. They want humiliation. They want a villain. Evelyn spoke quietly before the argument could grow. Then give them one less person to hurt. Both turned toward her. She stood very still beneath the cold fluorescent lighting, looking somehow smaller now that exhaustion finally showed through her composure. Mrs. Whitmore is right about one thing, she said softly. The press will enjoy this more if I stay visible. Damien frowned. You are talking like this is your fault. Evelyn gave him a tired smile that hurt far more than tears would have. Mr. Whitmore, people like me always become part of the mess even when we are only standing near it. The sentence settled painfully into the corridor. Because everyone there knew she was right. Wealthy scandals rarely damaged wealthy people for long. The damage usually landed somewhere lower. On assistants, drivers, staff, invisible people. Victoria looked away briefly toward the rain-streaked loading door. Something inside her seemed unsettled now too. Not softened exactly, just cracked enough for reality to enter. I did not know, she said suddenly. The corridor stilled again. Evelyn looked confused. Victoria exhaled carefully before continuing. About my father-in-law. Her voice remained controlled, but quieter now. Damien never told me someone stayed with him after the accident. Damien's expression darkened slightly. There was no reason to discuss it. Victoria laughed softly under her breath. Apparently, there were many things we stopped discussing years ago. The sentence hung between husband and wife with quiet sadness. Not dramatic sadness. Worse, familiar sadness. The kind that grows slowly inside expensive marriages where appearances matter more than honesty. Evelyn immediately lowered her eyes again, as though she should not be hearing this conversation. Damien noticed. This is not about you, he said gently. Tonight became about me the second your wife threw my name tag on the floor. The honesty in her voice silenced him completely. Victoria looked at Evelyn for several long seconds. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, she asked, "Why did you not defend yourself?" Evelyn blinked softly, surprised by the question. What would that have changed? Most people would have argued. Evelyn glanced down at the scratched silver name tag resting in her palm. Most people still believe humiliation can be repaired by winning. Her voice softened. I learned a long time ago that dignity and victory are not always the same thing. Nobody spoke after that. Even the event coordinator looked affected now. Because suddenly the waitress, standing beneath fluorescent kitchen lights, sounded wiser than half the people upstairs wearing custom tuxedos. A sharp burst of applause suddenly echoed faintly from the ballroom above as the governor apparently entered the event. The coordinator straightened anxiously. Mr. Whitmore, the press is asking for a statement now. Damien's eyes remained on Evelyn. Then they will get one. Victoria studied him carefully. Damien. He looked at her calmly. I spent years building a company around the idea that character matters more than status. His voice lowered slightly. Tonight would be a strange time to stop believing that. For the first time all evening, Victoria Whitmore had absolutely no response. The ballroom fell quiet the second Damien Whitmore returned upstairs. Not completely silent at first, just softer, like the room itself sensed. Something important was about to happen. Crystal chandeliers glowed above rows of wealthy donors and political figures while rain rolled down the towering windows overlooking Manhattan in silver streams. Near the entrance, several reporters stood waiting beside camera crews, their attention instantly locking onto Damien the moment he appeared. Victoria walked beside him now, composed once again but unusually pale beneath the ballroom lights. Behind them, several feet back, Evelyn remained near the service hallway entrance holding a silver tray against her chest like a shield she no longer believed in. She never intended to step fully into the room again tonight. But somehow she was still here. Damien moved toward the center of the ballroom, where the governor and Senator Bennett stood speaking with investors. Conversations slowly faded around him until only the soft clink of glasses and distant thunder remained. One reporter stepped forward carefully. Mr. Whitmore, is it true there was an incident tonight involving a member of your staff? Cameras immediately lifted. Victoria's shoulders stiffened beside him. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the marble floor. Damien looked around the ballroom slowly before answering. His expression remained calm, controlled, but there was something different in his voice now. Less polished, more honest. Yes, he said quietly. The room became completely still. There was. Another reporter raised her microphone slightly. Would you like to comment on what happened? Damien glanced toward Evelyn standing near the edge of the ballroom beneath the soft golden lights. She looked exhausted, embarrassed, ready to disappear the second this ended. And suddenly he understood something that made shame move sharply through his chest. The most decent person in the room had spent the entire night apologizing for existing inside it. Damien stepped away from the reporters without answering immediately. Slowly, deliberately, he crossed the ballroom floor toward Evelyn while hundreds of eyes followed him in silence. Evelyn looked startled as he approached. Mr. Whitmore, she whispered softly. Damien stopped in front of her. Then, without saying a word, he reached toward the silver name tag still resting in her hand. The same one Victoria had thrown onto the marble floor hours earlier. The ballroom watched in complete silence as Damien carefully took the scratched name tag from Evelyn's trembling fingers. Then he attached it gently back onto her uniform himself. The tiny click of the metal clasp echoed louder than the reporters' cameras. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Damien stepped back slightly, looking directly at Evelyn before finally turning toward the ballroom. Earlier tonight, he said calmly, someone suggested this woman did not belong here. His voice carried clearly through the silent room. I disagree. Across the ballroom, Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Damien continued. 5 years ago, during a snowstorm outside Boston, Evelyn Carter stayed beside my father after a serious car accident while dozens of other drivers passed by. The guests remained frozen. Even the reporters lowered their microphones slightly now. Tonight, Damien said, she helped one of our oldest investors through a medical emergency while the rest of us stood around uncertain what to do. Arthur Holloway quietly lowered his head near the balcony tables. Damien looked around the ballroom slowly. So let me be very clear. His voice softened, but somehow became even more powerful because of it. The only people who do not belong in rooms like this are those who mistake status for character. Absolute silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence this time. Reverent silence. The kind that arrives when truth finally enters a room dressed more elegantly than money ever could. Evelyn stared at him speechless, her eyes glassy beneath the chandelier light. She looked overwhelmed by the attention again, but this time the room no longer felt cruel. Guests who had ignored her earlier now watched her with something closer to respect. Genuine respect. Senator Bennett was the first to begin applauding softly. Then Arthur Holloway joined him. Then another table. And another. The applause spread slowly across the ballroom until the sound filled every corner beneath the crystal chandeliers. Not loud enough to feel theatrical. Honest. Enough to feel real. Evelyn shook her head faintly, almost embarrassed by it all. Please, she whispered. You do not need to do this. Damien looked at her quietly. Yes, he replied softly. I do. Across the ballroom, Victoria remained still for several long seconds before finally stepping forward herself. The applause gradually faded again as she approached Evelyn. The entire room watched carefully. Victoria looked down briefly at the polished marble floor where the name tag had fallen hours earlier. Then back at Evelyn. I was wrong, she said quietly. No performance. No dramatic tears. Just difficult honesty spoken in front of Manhattan's elite. Evelyn looked genuinely surprised. Victoria exhaled slowly. And I am sorry. The ballroom stayed silent once more. But now the silence felt warm somehow. Human. Evelyn studied Victoria for a long moment before offering the smallest smile of the night. Thank you, she answered softly. Outside, rain continued falling over Manhattan, while inside the Whitmore Grand Hotel, something far rarer than luxury had finally appeared. Humility. And sometimes, that was the only thing powerful enough to change a room forever.